It's Monday, February 10th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. And it is a hell of a day to talk ball because the Super Bowl is in the books. And I am back in right where I belong. My little box here. No more movement. A lot of outside time there in New Orleans. A lot of social discussions with the people out there. A lot of great food consumed. Football discussed. Anyways, enough of that. Hell of a day to talk ball in this little box, right where I belong. And joining me to do just that is Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
Oh, things are good. It was a good betting night, but for me, I'm sure that's what everybody's discussing at their water coolers today. If people have discussions at water coolers, enjoyed the game in so much as like that's first of all that's like what Super Bowls used to be like back in the day. You know, like when I was growing up, they all, with the exception of a handful of really close, exciting games, we'd get blowouts. Like that was commonplace, and usually it was the AFC on the wrong side of blowouts. So that's what we used to have to endure. I think if we were gonna get a blowout in the Super Bowl, let's put Patrick Mahomes on the wrong side of it, because you've always got that voice in your head that tells you like until it's mathematically over, it's never really over with Mahomes. So that was kind of fun. Just awesome display by Philadelphia, obviously. Fantastic game. Fun.
Well, I'm glad that this game, which Eagles 40, Chiefs 22, by the way, that does not encapsulate how that game felt. It didn't feel like a near 20-point gap between these two teams. It felt like a bajillion point gap, as Andy is illustrating here. I'm glad that felt comfortable to you, brought you back to your young days of the 50s or whatever, that you're talking about here. So that's wonderful to hear. I just want to, here's how this show's going to go. In the first segment, we're going to just kind of recap the game, talk through it. Segment number 2, we're going to dive into what's next for Kansas City. And then segment number 3, we're going to dive into what's next for the Philadelphia Eagles. So it'll feel a little bit like some of these postseason postmortems that we've been doing for these games, but we're just going to talk through both teams here because we've got one damn ball game to discuss here. But let's dive into this here. Recapping the game, Andy. A lot we could talk about here. The fact that it was a blowout, I actually think makes this a very clean game to discuss, and some very clear takeaways on both sides. But I'll just throw this to you, Andy. To me, like very early on in this game, I started because it was pretty clear how this was going to go. I mean, you always have that, like you said, that feeling of, okay, Patrick Mahomes can come back from anything. We've seen Tom Brady, who's calling the game, and I have to imagine is just like, yes, under his breath, maybe when the mic is muted, right. Whatever, as Mahomes doesn't, tarnish his legacy too early in Mahomes' career. The 28-3 thing's always in the back of your mind. I get that. However, it was very apparent how this game was going to go. And I kept thinking back to some of the pregame analysis of this Super Bowl, which was just, and I know I said this a lot myself, 2-53, the Eagles are the better team. The Chiefs just have Patrick Mahomes, which is ultimately why I ended up picking the Chiefs, and maybe just like a coward couldn't see myself not picking the Chiefs. But that's exactly how this game felt to me, Andy. Agree or disagree?
Oh, yeah, completely agree. If you simply match up, not just player for player, but like position group against position group ahead of this game, you had to keep landing on Philly. And again, everybody's got the voice in their head that's like, it's Patrick Mahomes, crazy to bet against him and all that. But the roster versus roster comparison, not all that close. And I think a couple of the biggest mismatches in the game coming in were going to be the Eagles' defensive front against that sort of slapped together Kansas City offensive line. And then, a couple of great Eagles receivers against a Chiefs secondary that really has one corner that you respect and everybody else is kind of vulnerable, right? And they exploited that. I mean, Philadelphia is just so good up and down the roster. A dominant roster built by Howie Roseman, who just nailed everything over the last year, 2 years, more than that. It's one of those things about the Eagles too, is they didn't, okay, I guess they just gave you the blueprint for beating the Chiefs, but nobody else can do that. Like, nobody else can just never blitz all game and consistently get pressure and flummox Patrick Mahomes rushing 4 consistently. That's crazy. And then you're able to keep 7 in coverage, and we're in zone. So everybody's just staring back at the quarterback, right? It's like everybody's a spy. That's going to be difficult for any quarterback. We've seen it in the Super Bowl in the past with Tom frickin' Brady, and now we've seen it with Mahomes. We didn't get one of those, Mahomes sort of backbreaking first down scrambles where he picks up 25 and it just like crushes your spirit. None of that happened. They not only got pressure on him, they also sort of walled him in, right? And didn't let him get outside, didn't let him do anything particularly creative with his legs. The dominance of the Eagles roster, as you put it, 2 through 53 really showed up.
Yeah, right. I mean, blueprint, give me a break. Be one of the most talented teams that we've seen in the last decade. Like that's not really a blueprint to me. I mean, look, we talk about football in very in-depth and kind of complex ways a lot on this show because I think the whole goal is to make people smarter about the game. We all want to get smarter about the game, especially if you're playing fantasy. You want to get smarter about the game so you can win fantasy matchups, things like that. That's the way to do it. However, football is simple sometimes, man. Like if you can win with your front four, if you can pressure a guy like Patrick Mahomes and this is going to come up a lot with the Kansas City Chiefs. Almost every end of game stat means nothing in this game. Okay. Like absolutely freaking nothing. And we'll talk about that a lot here, but Next Gen Stats had that, in the full game, Patrick Mahomes was pressured on 38.1% of his dropbacks against Kansas City, against the Philadelphia Eagles, 5th highest pressure rate faced in a single game in his career. That was despite the fact that the according to Next Gen, the Eagles didn't blitz once all night. And again, in the first half, this was like a 47% pressure rate. Yeah. As Nate put it, he had a higher pressure rate than completion percentage in the first half. And deep into the third quarter, it was like a 55% pressure rate. That's really more indicative of how this night went, despite the fact that they didn't blitz all night. And look, that's football, man. If you can't block things up, especially to that degree against a very talented front four in Philadelphia and one that goes deep, one that they can rotate players in and out. I mean, Milton Williams is a guy who's going to make himself a ton of money on the season. He played 47%. He played sub 50% of the snaps. So like, that's what this team is. That's how Philadelphia manages to get back here over and over and over again, is because they invest in the trenches. And yeah, like again, football is sometimes simple. And that is like reason number one that the Eagles blew out the Chiefs.
Yeah. Also, like just every known issue with Kansas City's offense was exploited, right? So again, you're saying it well. That they won in the trenches. Sweat, Williams, Davis, Carter, just like they just had the Chiefs' offensive line in hell, and they had Patrick Mahomes, therefore, in hell. The run game basically ineffective, an afterthought. No screen game to speak of. Like how many times during that game, and they're all small plays, and they don't seem to matter a whole lot in the moment. But like I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times Mahomes had to dirt the ball on a screen, which normally against pressure, that's a good answer. They took away easy answers, and they took away any home run ability until very late in the game. Not really a vertical element to the offense all season. Mahomes had actually in the regular season completed just like 25-26% of his deep attempts, right? So that wasn't something that Kansas City could do. They couldn't win that way. They hit some deep stuff late, but the game was decided. So that's an ongoing weakness. And man, like Kansas City needs one of those. They need one of those AJ Browns, and they do not have it, right? Right? Like that's just a glaring issue I don't know that they can get it in the offseason. There's not a lot of them available, but they need one of those. And now all of a sudden, Kansas City's needs are pretty exposed in ways that, that's just not going to happen during the regular season. Like they can, great coaching job, great quarterbacking, take you a long way in the regular season, obviously. But if you have some potentially fatal flaws when you start running up against the great teams that are, really well constructed like this, eventually it gets exposed. And wow, did that happen on Sunday?
No, that's a great way of saying it. I mean, the issues that cropped up for Kansas City in this game, these screaming problems weren't exactly silent all season. They were there, they were lingering, they were dormant. But they were consistent problems. Just some more first half stats for the people out there. Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. What a great finish for one of the weirdest run games I've ever seen. One of the least explosive, one of the least explosive run games in the NFL this season, combined for a pitiful 3 yards rushing between the two of them in the first half. And it was funny because, the kind of broadcast, like, well, you kind of want to run the ball in this situation. And you're tempted to throw the ball a ton because you're in this deficit, but you got to not put too much pressure on Mahomes. And I get where Burkhardt and Brady were coming from there. However, there hasn't been a big play from this run game all season. Basically, they're like a sub 5% explosive rushing team all season, and that's a problem. That was an issue in the first half. Again, Juju Smith-Schuster was the leading receiver with 16 yards, despite playing 65% of the snaps. And like you said, that butt whooping on the offensive line, they moved Joe Thuney out to left tackle because their plan, and Thuney is a great guard, and he's probably an average-ish left tackle, which is a miracle, by the way, that you can be an average-ish, maybe slightly below left tackle. You can just kick out and do that. But the only reason they did that is because their plan to just walk into the season with Kingsley Suamatia, their raw rookie second-round pick at left tackle, was a huge flop. A huge flop early in the season. So they're in kind of dire straits at these spots anyways. These issues have been present in the receiver core, and we'll dive more deeper into that later when we kind of try to project this team forward. They've had issues in the run game all season. This is really a team, Andy, that kind of got here by scratching and clawing and winning on the margins. And that just didn't fly against a team that's much better than them. And I just last point on the Eagles defense too. Again, the whole football is simple thing. We talked about this a lot leading up to the Super Bowl, that these were two of the best tackling teams in the NFL, and how they just consistently had an option in the flat to bring Mahomes down or to keep him behind the line of scrimmage on some of these plays where he was clearly trying to scramble. That was also very impressive as well.
Yeah, being able to prevent sort of the backbreaking scramble, the slow motion backbreaking scramble from Mahomes was a huge deal. Man, being able to just have 7 in coverage all the time, a huge deal. Kansas City's inability to exploit light boxes with its run game, a huge deal. Looking back on it, you see all these things that fell in favor of Philadelphia, and were pretty obviously going to fall in favor of Philadelphia. And again, it's a tribute to the greatness of Patrick Mahomes that they were still a favorite in the game, and it was easy to convince yourself that they had a real shot to win this game. But these rosters are not very close. And again, I'll just come back to the point that they're missing, Kansas City's missing a young version of DeAndre Hopkins, because he looked his age. He had a killer drop. Kelce, Kelce really looked his age. Kelce really looked like maybe this is end stage for him. He legitimately looked 35. I don't know. Did he might have had one catch that went for a first down, but it wasn't a lot. He kept getting tackled short of the sticks. He was, even in his best games, he looks a little bit slow. But man, he looked a little bit stuck in mud. So, they just don't, outside of Worthy, who, hey, incredible late season surge for Xavier Worthy. They needed him early, and it wasn't there. Obviously, he got numbers late, but incredible December, January performance from him. But he's not he's not one of those AJ Brown types. We've seen the I don't know. He's a rookie, so I don't want to say that we've seen the best version of Xavier Worthy, but he's gonna be limited in terms of what we can ask him to do, and we're always gonna have to scheme some things up for Xavier Worthy. He's not one of those just put him on the outside and go win against press coverage kind of. He's not going to be that guy. And they need a compliment there. It's tough. They got a lot of holes to fill.
Yeah, that's gonna, when we get to what's next for the Kansas City Chiefs, that's something that we're gonna hit on a lot, is that there's kind of a sneaky long to-do list for this team in the offseason. And like, you can kind of convince me of anything here, which I think makes them makes projecting them for fantasy next season, as if like that needs to happen right here on February 10th. Okay. But it makes it pretty difficult to say where anybody should go, because you could kind of convince me of anything with this team. But yeah, I want to bring this back to Worthy in particular, because it's just so funny. Like, he had 157 yards in this game and 2 touchdowns. And I'm getting flamed for saying this on Twitter kind of by some of the Worthy bros. And I'm not even saying this to take anything away from Xavier Worthy, who is without question the best healthy skill position player for the Kansas City Chiefs right now. I mean, I think without question, he's obviously the best player for them. But that's like, so all of those yards are meaningless. That's why I said like game long stats for Kansas City is totally meaningless. Just to make the point on that, Xavier Worthy had 1 yard at halftime. One yard at halftime. He had 9 yards when the game, when there was 34-0 with 3 minutes left in the third quarter. He split 2 backup safeties to catch the 50-yard, to catch the last touchdown. Like they're just that great. Like I don't think we learned anything new about Xavier Worthy in this game. And again, I don't think we necessarily needed to. I think we know who he is, and he's a good, valuable player to this team. He'd been a man coverage answer to them. But to your point, it'd been in sort of these manufactured ways where you got to get him on a defender who is, I keep picking on Damar Hamlin, and I'm sorry to do it, but you're getting him a mismatch in that regard. You're getting him against somebody who he's so clearly faster than, and obviously Philadelphia there's not a lot of those guys that you're picking on in the secondary. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell coming off another excellent performance. Cooper DeJean is a total baller. Your boy Cooper DeJean, shout out to him. Happy birthday, Cooper! Hell of an effort by you
on his birthday.
On his birthday, baby. I mean, like there's no guy that you're doing that with. In Philadelphia. So yeah, like Worthy's definitely part of their solution going forward. But yeah, I mean, I think more important than his stats in the second half is the fact that, like you said, he's a guy that, like, these receivers were getting beat up and couldn't get open all night. And I mean, that in the early portion of the game, and that was obvious to see on the broadcast angle. Like, they're trying to run quick game, and these guys are just blotted up by more physical, bigger defensive backs. And honestly, I'm tired of talking about the Chiefs in that way from a receiver perspective.
Yeah. And that really all the Chiefs offense normally has going for it is quick game, right? We're gonna run for 3.5 yards each time, and we've got like some quick game answers. And Philadelphia just took it all away. Again, they seem to blow up every screen. Short stuff was just not available. They had Mahomes flummoxed all game. So obviously dominant defensive performance. Like, I'm just thinking of all the guys, like, who had a bad game for Philadelphia? Did anybody have a rough game? Zach Bond was fantastic. The interception was incredible. 7 tackles, quarterback hit, monster season for him. 150 tackles on the year. Cooper DeJean obviously got the pick 6. That was great. I mean, everybody was so good. It's a small thing, but like Jake Elliott wasn't good all year. Went 8 for 8 on his kicks in the frickin' Super Bowl, and actually like 11 for 11 or 12 for 12 if you count like the negated by penalty. I mean, like, if Jake Elliott is drilling absolutely everything, man, it's their day. Like just a flawless performance. You can't say enough good things about Vic Fangio, but again, like, if you can get pressure 55% of the time on the opposing quarterback rushing 4, it's a cheat code. It makes everything so easy.
It's hard to win that way when you're giving up that kind of pressure. I want to move to the Eagles offense here before we throw to the first break. Obviously, there's a team that won the damn game. And of course, like, I agree with you. The first story here, and I said this online last night, it has to be the defense and Vic Fangio cementing like a legacy of being like an inner circle defensive coordinator. Not that he already wasn't one of, if not the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. Shout out to Miami Dolphins, who couldn't kick Vic out of the building fast enough despite making him the highest paid defensive coordinator in the NFL last year, right? He couldn't kick him out of the building fast enough for coaching them hard. Players, seriously, not to take a quick shot here at Miami, like they're catching a stray on this one, but I'm definitely looking, I'm taking like a hard look in the mirror if I'm the damn Miami Dolphins, and like, what is our building really when they had players openly celebrating Vic Fangio being fired last season? I'm just saying, I'm thinking about what that means. Anyways, so that's obviously, like I said, cementing a legacy for Vic. I think you could have given MVP of this game to any of those defensive players. It did feel a little bit of like, I think the last time we saw a defense take down a great offense like this, it was the 2013 Seattle Seahawks, and they're kind of like, who the hell do we give the defensive MVP to? They ended up giving it to Malcolm Smith, who did not end up working out for the Raiders when he was signed there in free agency. But that sort of felt like what it was going to be to me. Like you could give the MVP to almost anybody on that defense. You could give it to DeJean. You could give it to Josh Sweat. You could give it to Milton Williams, right? But it ends up going to Jalen Hurts. And I want to use that kind of as a transition point here to Jalen Hurts, because something I said to Greg Rosenthal on the previous show, Andy, was that I think Jalen Hurts had almost started to get too much crap during this run as the Eagles quarterback, because he's like the weak link of the roster. And if you take that quote out of context, which I'm sure people will do, that makes it sound like I'm taking a shot at Jalen Hurts. But it's only because they have the number one defense in the league, and they have like the number one running back in the league, and they have a guy who's a top 5 receiver in the league, and they probably have the best offensive line in the league. And like Jalen Hurts is not the best quarterback in the league. He's not the second best quarterback in the league, or whatever. He's probably not a top 5 guy, but he's not bad. Like, and that's the weak link. That's how damn good your team is. And I think he's really covered himself in a lot of glory these last 2 games, and particularly in this game showed you that there are weaknesses to his game, but the strengths of Jalen Hurts' game are really strong. And I think you saw it all night long. He had the one pick, right? He had the one pick where he got a little flummoxed by a Spags blitz. That's going to happen. Talked about that a lot leading up to the game. But otherwise, clean effort, really good as a scrambler. And I mean, shoot, dude, he's delivering pinpoint go balls to Jahan Dotson on the outside. Shout out to Super Bowl champion Jahan Dotson. Great. I mean, you could quibble again. Should we give an MVP to one of the defensive players? It's quarterback league, whatever. Hurts was awesome in this game last night.
Yeah, Hurts was awesome. The throw to Devontae really obviously clinched not only clinched the game if it wasn't already decided, but I thought clinched the Super Bowl MVP. Is a beautiful ball. He doesn't, he's not an every throw guy exactly, but the things that he does well that not every quarterback does well, fill in those gaps, right? Like we got 70 plus rushing yards out of him, and he looked as fast and sort of as frisky as a rusher as he has all season. And we kind of came into the week worried a little bit about his health. So, mobility wise, he was great. Super decisive. Other people have made this point. Fantastic at the line of scrimmage. Like the stuff that he got them into pre-snap, the stuff that he was seeing, he nailed it all. Like he was great. And I think, at this point, whatever else you think of him, you've got to accept that he is one of the best big game quarterbacks in the league right now. He's played in 2 Super Bowls, and he outplayed Patrick Mahomes in both of them. He has 7 combined touchdowns in those 2 Super Bowls. Very few mistakes. Even the interception, he was drilled when he threw it. And maybe there's maybe the idea there is it's a back shoulder to AJ, and AJ doesn't see it the same way. Whatever, it gets picked. But man, the 2 Super Bowl performance by Jalen Hurts to this point has been nearly flawless. 17 for 22 in this game, 10 yards per attempt. Again, just the gorgeous deep ball to Devontae that put the thing away. He was fantastic. The other point that I want to make about Philly, like, your whole point as a front office, as a coaching staff, all this stuff is hard across every major team sport, right? You got to get to the playoffs, and then you also got to be the team that is playing its absolute best at the agreed upon time when everything matters the most. And no coaching staff did that quite like Philadelphia, because there were moments in this regular season where like they'd get a win, but you felt like they were just so obviously the better team in the game, and yet the margin was like 3 points, 4 points, and you're like, why aren't they putting teams away? Like the Browns game was that way, the Panthers, the Jaguars, right? They had a bunch of squeakers that didn't need to be squeakers, and then they freaking shook that habit in the playoffs. They scored 95 points in the NFC title game and Super Bowl combined. They had a plus 68 point differential in 4 playoff games. Just an absolutely dominant run, curb stomping really, really good teams in the biggest weeks. Just an absolute tribute to the quarterback, to the coaching staff, and to a team that just made so few mistakes.
Perfect way to sum it up. I love it. Yeah, it's been a really fun team to watch in the postseason. They're undefeated this season when Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown start and finish a game. And I think like that's just a great way to show obviously Hurts's value, but just the value of having an elite receiver too. In addition to the fact that they had the offensive player of the year in Saquon Barkley, who, if you told me coming into this game like Barkley's going to average 2.3 yards per carry, and you didn't also inform me that they were going to get an all-time Super Bowl performance from their defense, I probably would have thought they would lose this game.
One like little small betting angle to this one, it was crazy. In hindsight, it's crazy that Saquon Barkley had like better odds to win Super Bowl MVP than Jalen Hurts. Like, default to the quarterback. That was a little bit like, if you thought that Philadelphia could win this game, you needed to bet Jalen Hurts to win Super Bowl MVP, because that's just, quarterbacks win everything. And it's crazy that we made it this deep into the podcast before mentioning Saquon Barkley, but the attention that had to be focused on him because he had a historic season and is just like a cartoonish superhero level athlete. The attention that had to be focused on him made so many other things possible. So even though his box score line doesn't look great and his efficiency doesn't look great, although he was terrific as a receiver, just the absolute focus that Spags and that Kansas City defense needed to place on him was so critical.
Yeah, I was going to make that point too, that he was useful to them as a receiver. He actually had the highest first downs per route run among any of the Eagles pass catchers. So that was like a nice little, he was out there and useful as a receiver. And that's not something that we actually saw him really maximized with. Not that as if we needed to see more things maximized by Saquon Barkley with the Philadelphia Eagles. That was something that maybe was maybe a little bit different. But anything else to hit from the Super Bowl before we go to a break and sort of turn the page to look forward?
Awesome halftime show. Loved it. That was just a murder too. That was so good.
Tough night for Drake. That's all. That's all I'll say on that one. I was gonna let you kind of just tee off on any other Super Bowl stuff like that at the end of the show, but yeah, since you brought it up, tough night for Drake. I mean, when the first thing I pull up on Instagram after the Super Bowl is like 4 or 5 Drake memes, on the Instagram reels.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the damn Super Bowl, and I'm not seeing any Super Bowl content. I'm just seeing Drake memes. Tough night for Drake.
Really rough.
All right. Let's throw to our first break. When we come back, we'll talk about what's next for the Kansas City Chiefs right after this. All right, we're back. Andy, let's talk through what's next for the Kansas City Chiefs. We've kind of hinted at this throughout the show, but sneaky big offseason, I think, to-do list for Kansas City. And we've hit on some of them, but as we just look through not just this game, but obviously reaction to kind of the whole season, sort of some table setting things here. We've mentioned it that they have issues on the offensive line. They actually are allocating a lot of resources to that offensive line between Tooney, who's up for an extension, Jawan Taylor, who has the 3rd highest guaranteed salary on this team, and Creed Humphreys on an extension as well. I don't even think Taylor's been like a plus starter for them. And Trey Smith is up for free agency. He's probably a candidate to move on because of the resources that they're allocated there. And again, left tackle, maybe Kingsley Suamataia is taking a big step in his development, but that would be a pretty big, leap of faith, to be kind, to just walk in the next season with him as the starting left tackle. And they also have free agents on defense. Justin Reed's a free agent. They probably need to add some players in the secondary on the defensive line. And that's not even touching the skill position group, which I want to kind of save for a second, because again, you could get me to believe anything there. So pretty tough when we're talking about big needs on both the offensive line and the defense before we've even touched these skill position players.
Yeah. Kansas City they have some cap space, right? It's like $15 million in cap space, something like that. But there's so many there's so many teams ahead of them, right? There's so many teams that have a lot of money. Trey Smith is going to be Trey Smith, I think 25 years old, and good, and like everybody with a lot of cap space in the league needs exactly him. Like I don't know. That's going to be a very difficult player to retain. There's going to be a great market for his services. So we probably have a couple of really expensive holes to fill on the offensive line. That's just the thing when you start thinking about like all the positions of need on this Kansas City roster. You know, obviously they've solved the most expensive and important position, and they've got that locked in for like the next decade. So great, but everything else that's really expensive, they have a need. Left tackle. We probably need another corner. It wouldn't hurt to have like a big ticket receiver. We talked about that, right? Like these are really, really expensive needs to fill. They've got to find a way to do it in the draft and free agency. And we're in the heart of, Patrick Mahomes, 29 years old. Like we're in his prime. We gotta compete all the time. So it's tough, man. And then like, again, we mentioned it in the first segment, like Travis Kelce really showing his age. Do we get another season from Travis Kelce? We probably do. Maybe we do. But we can't rule out the possibility that he's gonna exit the stage at some point really soon too. And then, there's just a lot of needs to fill here. There's not. You start looking at the free agents on this roster, and there's not one like absolute superstar where we have to fill it in, but it's a lot of names. They just got a lot of holes that need to be plugged.
Yeah, and it does start on the offensive line to me. Like we saw last year, not last year. Last time they lost a Super Bowl, they went hard at the offensive line. They brought in Tooney, and it just kind of all went from there. They drafted and developed guys like Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, but now we're moving on to like another era here, and I don't know that they can afford to just say, "Hey, we are laser focused on the offensive line and we'll be okay." Brett Veach made it known after that game. He like talked to several reporters saying like, "We are never going to let Patrick Mahomes play behind a bad offensive line again in a big game like we did in the Super Bowl against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers." Well, guess what? You did. Guess that happened. It just happened. So that's like a huge area of concern. But you also mentioned all those needs on defense, and then kind of transitioning into these skill position players, man. Other than Worthy, I think I would say it's open everywhere. You could convince me that any addition needs to be made. Even Pacheco, who probably was just coming back too early from a serious injury, but he was losing like big snaps to Kareem Hunt in the postseason. Like, if you want to draft Pacheco in fantasy next year, you better be able to tell yourself that was just an injury and it's no big deal or whatever. But I could see them somewhere along the way, like adding a more consistent rusher, kind of in the mold of Kareem Hunt, just a younger one, but a guy that can consistently get them what's blocked like Hunt did. Because Pacheco, even at his best, is not really that guy, right? Like he's more of like a home run hitter. He's like a unique style of running back. So I could see that being a spot that they add not a big ticket item, but something where like they just, it may be day 2 in the draft, maybe early day 3, maybe someone that's kind of a cheap free agent. I don't know. But man, like outside of Worthy in the pass catcher room, like you're talking about Travis Kelce coming back next year, dude, he's like 2 years into a steep decline at this point. He didn't even do what he did last year where, okay, goofed around all regular. I'm not being serious, but like didn't do much in the regular season, and then he just turns it on in the playoffs. We didn't even see that this year, right? He was looking his age for sure in this postseason, and I can't imagine. He's a guy that if they move on from him, they actually would get some salary relief. And at this point, like, I don't think I could ever see Travis Kelce wearing another uniform. I think it's more likely he just retires at this point, even if this is a tough way for him to end his career. I mean, that's what you do when you try to go for the three-peat to end your career. You might end up hanging on 1 year too long. I wouldn't be even if he comes back to this team, he would not be in my top 5 tight ends next year from a fantasy perspective. I can certainly get 5 guys that I'm a little more excited about there. And then the receiver room, Marquise Brown's a free agent. DeAndre Hopkins is a free agent. Even Juju Smith-Schuster is a free agent. Like Mecole Hardman, Justin Watson. Other than Worthy, and I know people will bring up Rashee Rice. Rice is coming off a serious knee injury that might be a little complicated and has a suspension looming over his head. So, I'll tell you what, man, that again, you could convince me of anything there, which is as we sit here today, Andy Behrens, if somebody's got like a strong take about where they're ranking a Chiefs player in fantasy, they can do that. I will not be among them.
Yeah, I actually feel like, and it was a back burner issue before, but coming off the Super Bowl, and you said it, if Pacheco's issues this season weren't entirely related to the injury, and they probably were, we've seen enough good things out of Isaiah Pacheco over the previous couple seasons that it was probably injury related, but it wasn't good. And the prime version, the usual version of Isaiah Pacheco would not have been losing touches to this year's Kareem Hunt. So that was a concern. So they have all of a sudden we have maybe a hole or a glaring hole in the backfield. I think you're totally right about Kelce. I think we're not picking at the top of the board exactly. They have, they're going to let other teams dictate what their pick is going to end up being, but
right.
It's not totally crazy to think about that team being in on one of the, this is a good tight end class in this draft. They might want to take a look at that. I don't know that they can get up to the range where you'd have to take somebody like Warren, Loveland, but it's a good tight end class, and they have to be considering it because that's a hole all of a sudden. And yeah, you're right about Rashee Rice too. Like, we don't know what it's going to look like when he comes back. And we don't know how many games he's going to miss due to the suspension, but it's not going to be nothing. He's a nice complementary piece with Xavier Worthy. Like, I think that's a good one too. And maybe in an offseason where you can't address everything, because they don't, between draft picks and a modest amount of money to spend under the cap, you're probably not going to be able to address everything with stars, right? Maybe they can't do that. So maybe the receiving core is really Rice and Worthy, and we hope to get one more season out of Travis Kelce. I don't know. But that's awfully thin, and there's no, there's no game breaker there.
No, there's not. And yeah, even I like Rashee Rice a lot. He's obviously a very good player, just like I like Xavier Worthy, and he's a very good player, but both those guys are specific type of receivers, and both of them take a little bit of role catering. We probably got a little bit of signs that Rashee Rice could be a little bit more than what he was as a rookie, but primarily I still think the base of his game is running in breaking routes against zone coverage. And Xavier Worthy is a guy that you need to move around from the slot and the outside. I think you could probably get away, like, your base formation if you're in a 3 receiver set is Xavier Worthy off the line, moving between slot and the outside, and like him and Rice are kind of condensed, and Rice is on the line of scrimmage, and sometimes he's slot, sometimes he's outside, and like your tight end is on the line, and you got another off-ball receiver over there. But this is the type of stuff, like, I'm sick of doing this with the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, get me one real outside receiver, okay? Like, somebody that can run a damn 8 to 10 yard curl route against man coverage and like really scare the defense vertically on the outside and come back to the football, so that, like, when you're Patrick Mahomes and you're under pressure, you get to the top of your drop and that guy is open, or you can anticipate him being open. We have not had a receiver to do that in this era of Chiefs football. Obviously Tyreek is like a one-of-one player, so we're like not even bothering to compare back to then. But like since the Tyreek trade, it's been a lot of these like gadgety power slot guys. I don't think Worthy's a pure gadget player. I think he's a really, really good player. But I'm just talking about the specific archetype of receiver. It's probably not going to happen because, like you said, they have a lot of needs. But I mean, just somebody in that mold at some point in the draft, maybe like a low-cost free agent. Even if it is like you might have to go veteran rental route. You might have to go like distressed asset Stephon Diggs or like, something
right.
like that.
Yeah.
But like I would take that at this point if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, because Rice, if he's out there, Worthy, if he's out there, can probably be your primary target players, but they got to have a player like that, I think, if they want to reach their offensive ceiling. And I will die on that hill.
Diggs is probably a good call. That might be the best case scenario there, but they do need something, because again, you've got like we're talking about 29-year-old Patrick Mahomes, and you got to the Super Bowl, and your window is very open for the next for the foreseeable future. And I would love to see it as well, because it's it's so stark when they're in a matchup with a team like Philadelphia that has an AJ Brown, right? Like, my God, like let's pair something like that with Patrick Mahomes for a few years and see what it looks like.
Right. It's so funny in the pregame. It's, they have a top corner and Trent McDuffie that he can just track AJ Brown around the field. Oh, okay. Let's not forget that like AJ Brown is a lot bigger than Trent McDuffie, and sometimes top five corners don't lose to top five receivers. I mean, I gotta sit in there and think of like Trent McDuffie, probably top five corner, but AJ Brown's certainly a top five receiver. Even if there are five great receivers, like it's just, again, this team needs to trade for George Pickens. Like I keep like imagining that in my mind, because I think George Pickens will. Again, you could convince me in 2 years he's out of the league or he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. That's just like that's the George Pickens range of outcomes. And I feel like if one of those spots where he could maybe be on the positive end of that is Kansas City, and that's like the exact type of receiver they need. Probably not like a true. They're not going to find an AJ Brown. I doubt they're going to find an AJ Brown out there. Like, show me where that sleeping giant is at this point. It's probably not going to be available in the draft, but like just a good starting X receiver who can beat man coverage, like get that guy. And like I think they have to do something creative in that mold. I'm not saying exactly like they got to go out and trade for George Pickens. All their problems are solved, but like something creative in that mold, I think is probably what the Chiefs have to do at wide receiver.
Yeah, and that's just kind of fantasy wish casting, but it's fun, right? Like, let's go. I don't know. Let's kick the tires on DK Metcalf or Pickens. Pickens is so perfect because he fits the mold of like the sort of rehab project receiver that Andy Reid has so enamored of over the years too, right? Not that he's at like at Kadarius Toney levels or anything like that, but there are some obvious flaws and issues with George Pickens. He's just exactly the type of guy that Kansas City adds.
Yeah, he's not full Kadarius Toney, but he's maybe in the next neighborhood over. He's Kadarius Toney adjacent, but he's a real receiver. Like even when they traded for Toney, I remember that, and I remember your tweets out there, people, when they traded for Kadarius Toney and like Toney yards per route run and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, throw out screens and throw out bull routes and like tell me the yards per route run. Anyway, so yeah, I remember that was like, oh my God, what an eye roll. That's the exact type of receiver I'd love them to stop fetishizing over there in Kansas City. But yeah, kind of a sneaky lot to do for Kansas City this offseason, a lot to consider for them. So I would say that this is just an unsettled kind of, no team has more built-in equity and trust and faith that like they could get right back to here next year and I wouldn't blink an eye. And it probably will be a top 10 offense, bare minimum, no matter who's in Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid's orbit. But lot to do in the offseason from an offensive perspective, and that's not even touching the defensive side of the football. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we will hit on what the Eagles face next after winning the Super Bowl right after this. All right, we're back. Andy, let's talk through what the Philadelphia Eagles have to face next this offseason after the city is destroyed, which I'm sure it is right now. I believe I saw videos of people carrying, stoplight poles, not stop signs, stoplight poles. I've seen videos of Eagles fans with masks on, Eagles costume masks hanging from light poles with Defying Gravity playing in the background. I've seen it all. So after they level the city in celebration, and then they have the Super Bowl parade where I'm sure there will be a lot of fun, inebriated rants and such. After all that, what comes next for the Philadelphia Eagles? Obviously facing a much more enjoyable moment here as they look to the offseason than the team they just beat.
It's really tough to look at that roster and say there's a glaring need anywhere. First of all, on the offensive side of the ball, every key playmaker is actually locked up, right? Like they don't need to do anything there. They get to run it back with just a really good cast of playmaking weapons. We got a couple of free agents on that defensive line that just won them the damn Super Bowl, so that's a concern. But they do have cap space, and they have a GM who has just operated flawlessly for the last couple of years, right? So somebody that you fully trust. They look like a team that is set up for a multi-year run. They should be the overwhelming favorite, I think, next year to repeat as Super Bowl champs. And like I've heard a number of people say, I've seen a number of people tweet, because we're all excited about Jaden Daniels and what he can be. Heard a number of people say, "Oh man, Washington is gonna run this thing over the next decade." Guess what? Jalen Hurts is 2 years older than Jaden Daniels. He's 26. Like this is a young player who again has outplayed Patrick Mahomes now in 2 Super Bowls. He was just great. So. They have, whatever we think of Hurts as a quarterback, and wherever we think he slots in among all the league's quarterbacks, he's been great in the biggest game. He's writing a Hall of Fame resume. That kid's really impressive, and he's very young. So they've got that solved too. So we've really just got, we've got the best GM, perhaps in the game, who needs to make a few changes, on the margins to keep this thing rolling. I don't know. I suppose it's an issue that they need to replace the OC again. Shout out to Sirianni post game, who was like, "Let's run this shit back, Kellen." I get it. It would be nice to actually bring an OC back for a second year once in a while after a successful season, but it's the price of being great, right? You lose your coordinators. It happens. You either lose your coordinators every year because you're the Bears and you have to keep firing them, or you lose your coordinators every year because you're so damn good and you're making them look good. And that's the situation in Philadelphia. So we need a new OC and we need some additional pass rushing assistance. But like, again, they have cap money, they have their picks. They're so well situated.
Right. And not to mention that they have more leeway than any other franchise to do some funky stuff with the cap and salaries and push money into the future, and just very low base signings, or very low base salaries, but big bonuses and stuff like that, which, Jeffrey Lurie, like, they have a competitive advantage because they have an owner who's invested in the process, both from a time and financial perspective. Okay. Like, you just look at some of these joke teams around the league. Those owners are not allowing, and some of it is, the financial position of these people, as if you're going to get an ounce of sympathy from me with with some of the net worth of these human beings. They're afforded more in Philadelphia to operate, and that gives you a lot of faith in what they can bring back here with, they have just over 13 million, just shy of 14 million really in effective cap space, which is, in after they sign their rookies and things like that. But that's not nothing. Like the Chiefs are in the red in effective cap space, like the Bucks, the Texans, the Cowboys, the Falcons, the Dolphins, teams that didn't win the damn Super Bowl this year, are in the red in terms of effective cap space, according to overthecap.com. So yeah, I mean, they're in a really good position there. You mentioned the Kellen Moore stuff, who obviously we're all kind of operating under the assumption that he will be the next Saints head coach. Which it's right around noon Eastern right now. That news could break any time that deal is finalized and he is the new Saints head coach. However, I will just note that the Saints head coaching search has been very weird. Like it wouldn't totally surprise me. I think it's probably like a 98% certainty, but there's a 2% chance that Kellen Moore's like, you know what? It is pretty cool being the Eagles offensive coordinator. And Jalen Hurts is on a multi-year deal. A.J. Brown's on a multi-year deal. Devontae Smith's on a multi-year deal. Dallas Goedert's on a multi-year deal. Dude, Jahan Dotson is back on this team next year, and he's giving him a little pop in the playoffs. The only guy who's on the offensive line is Mekhi Becton, who is a scrap heap pickup. And moves to right guard after being a bust at left tackle for the Jets. And like, you have all the shout out to Mekhi Becton. Go get your money now because you had a really good season for the Eagles. Well, shoot, I mean, you have all the faith in the world that Jeff Stoutland can just get another one of those guys and plug him in at right guard and churn and burn at that position, because that's what the Eagles do. Kellen Moore can be sitting there like, you know what? Look pretty good to be in the Eagles offensive coordinator. I know it's dangerous to do this. We just saw this with Bobby Slowick. Like, no thanks to a bunch of head coaching interviews and then just get fired the next season.
Yeah.
Probably not going to happen here in Philadelphia with all these guys coming back. I think there's a small chance he just decides to say no thank you to the Saints because that's such a disaster. But I am operating under the assumption that he's the next Saints head coach, and then Jalen Hurts will be under his 4th play caller in as many seasons.
Yeah, which again, that seems wild. Although, like, I don't know. You have to build an offense that's so specific to Jalen Hurts, and it's kind of the Jalen Hurts offense. I don't know. I don't know. It's going to change radically year over year. But once again, that's the price of being a great team. I assume he'll take the head coaching position because that's, because money, and they just don't come around very often. But man, he is in a tidy situation where Philadelphia is going to run this back, and they are, once again, they're just the clear favorite in the NFC. There are, I should say, I don't spend a lot of time looking at like who's got cap space or anything like that. But man, I was looking at it this morning, and every team that you worry about in the NFC has just a ton of cap space, right? Like Washington does, Minnesota does, Detroit does. Like everybody in the NFC can spend.
Chicago, don't leave them off, Andy. Ben Johnson, $53 million in effective cap space.
They do really have a lot. I wasn't going to try to, they're probably going to be trying to poach Trey Smith. They're going to be one of the many teams that is that is going to be interested there. They've got some holes. I'm, as optimistic a Bears fan as I am, I'm not quite ready to put them in the tier of the Vikings and Lions and Commanders, but all these teams have money to throw around. The Rams have some money to throw around. Like, it is going to be an arms race in the NFC. So I don't want to make it seem like the Eagles are just going to walk into it. They have such an advantage in that everybody who might be expensive is locked up. They like those things are all solved. That is not today's problem. Their offseason needs are actually very few.
Right. I mean, Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, and Zach Bond are up for free agency. I would guess, and this is purely a guess, and if it is take ages like milk, I don't care one way or another. My guess is they probably lose 2 of those guys. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Like Milton Williams, get ready to learn, Carolina Panthers or Commanders or something like that, because I mean, he's a guy who can absolutely make $20 million on the open market, and somebody should be more than willing to pay. Panthers only have $15 million in effective cap space, so maybe I take that back. But there's a lot of teams that are going to be ready and willing to pay him $20+ million. I'd guess he's not on this team next year. Sweat is coming off a great run, and Zach Bond. If I'm Zach Bond, I'm coming back to Philadelphia. That's the thing here. That would be the one that I'd be kind of surprised if he moves on, but he's coming off a damn all-pro season. Like, somebody could absolutely be willing to pay him the bag. Like Mike Vrabel looking at Zach Bond in free agency with just ungodly amounts of cap space. Why would you not want to be like, hey, come in here and like, I will do exactly what we did there or what you did there, and we'll build my defense around you. So that side of the ball definitely has some concern. But Daniel Jeremiah tweeted out last night, this is a great defensive line draft class. The Eagles are here because they invest in the trenches. So I think they can probably survive over there. And yeah, offensively, man, I'm glad you brought up the point about Jalen Hurts, and I kind of want to sort of end it on this because I mean, Hurts is Super Bowl MVP here, and we do this stuff in the media, right? Where, where does Jalen Hurts rank among the league quarterbacks? This, that, and the other. He's not a top 10 guy. He's not a top 12 guy. Nate and I were kind of getting into it last night, where I was willing to say like 10 or 12. Nate was more like top half. Inarguably top half quarterback of the league, but like, oh, is this guy better than him? What could this quarterback do with the Eagles? Who gives a shit? Because like, he's the quarterback for this team, and he's the right quarterback for this team. And almost regardless, I know this is dangerous to say because we just did the Brian Johnson thing where they lose Shane Steichen, they promote from within, and Brian Johnson just couldn't push the buttons quite like Shane Steichen could. But I think we're at a point with Hurts where every offense becomes the Jalen Hurts offense, basically, because he's a specific type of quarterback. And if you get the right coordinator to just zhush that up a little bit, which is what I think Kellen Moore did this year, you can walk into a great offense. And certainly from a fantasy perspective, Hurts will be a top 3 ranked, top 5 ranked quarterback next season. Somebody I'm absolutely willing to draft into. Barkley will be a top 2 pick, bare minimum, if not the consensus 101 pick in drafts. AJ Brown will go really high. Devonta Smith will go really high because I think it comes back to Hurts. Like I'm not trying to overrate Hurts in this moment, but I just think that he's a guy he's got flaws, no question, but the strengths are strong enough that you can build something around him. And I think that's good for all of these players, especially where we're going to want to take them next season.
I also feel like we have to give him credit for like his mastery of the position is beyond where it was a couple years ago. Again, he was really good pre-snap in this Super Bowl. He was great at the line of scrimmage against, Spags defense. And the things that he does well, like some of those, deep sideline shots to these great receivers. I mean, he was on point in this game. And I don't know, maybe it's a meathead sports fan thing to say, but my God, that guy's good in big games.
Yeah.
like the brighter the lights, the better that guy is. He was absolutely fantastic outside of one throw, which was not entirely his fault, right? He was getting drilled, and he was nearly flawless. So Jalen Hurts is my quarterback for the next 10 years. Hell yeah, I'd feel great about it. And again, I can't say it enough. He's really young. He's younger than you think. I know he's been, the combination of the fact that he's been in the league for a while now, and he was so prominent as a college player at multiple stops. You might be thinking, oh, Jalen Hurts, he must be 32. He's 26 years old. He's barely older than Jaden Daniels, right? They're like on the same timeline. So this ain't going anywhere.
It's funny you said that, like it's maybe a meathead thing to say. Honestly, and we're wrapping up the season here on the Super Bowl recap show. Andy, this was kind of the meathead football season, if we're being honest about it. Like, guess what matters? Trench play.
Yeah.
The running game is back, baby. The toughness and tackling on the defensive side of the football. Like, remember a couple years ago, all anybody could talk about was, oh, we got to play a lot of coverage on the back end, and if we give a little bit up in the run game, that's so fine. Like, we're gonna play two high safeties, we're gonna play coverage, and now it's just like, hey, maybe it's actually good to beat the shit out of wide receivers on the outside and have some aggressive players up front. Like, that's pretty cool. That's back, and I think Jalen Hurts being the guy to get Super Bowl MVP in this season is a perfect way to encapsulate it too, because again, there's some things about his game that people like myself will criticize because, like, again, I said this to Greg on the preview show, he doesn't do like what I love to see quarterbacks do, where, okay, you got a receiver who's running routes over the middle of the field and you're ripping off you're getting open against zone coverage and he's ripping these deep digs and stuff like that. I love to see that. That's what aesthetically I like, that brand of football. He's not really that guy, but he's more than good enough. And oh, by the way, again, this meathead point, how perfect is it that Jalen Hurts, who, as you said, maybe this is just dumb football guy stuff, but he's really good in big games. The biggest moment of his college career at Alabama was he was benched in a big game for Tua, who immediately comes in and throws a deep shot to Devonta Smith. And Jalen Hurts basically drives the knife in the Kansas City Chiefs after everything that he went through to get to that moment. He drives the knife into the Kansas City Chiefs on a deep shot to Devonta Smith. Very cool full circle moment for Jalen Hurts, who, like I said, in the season of, hey, just dumb meathead football, like, and that's the sport. You can do all this stuff to, you can be like a dork like me and chart color-coded routes and all that. But at the end of the day, this is a sport about toughness and physicality. A guy who's really tough and really physical, and Jalen Hurts ends it with a Super Bowl MVP, throwing a big-time touchdown to a guy who was the recipient of the touchdown after him getting benched. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that is wild, and like a wild full circle situation. He's also like, I mean, he might be in the Hall of Fame already, but you get to one more Super Bowl and win it, and you are there.
I'm sure the internet's going to love you putting Jalen Hurts in the Hall of Fame conversation already. But I'll leave you to deal with that one. Andy,
once again, any other than Patrick Mahomes in 2 Super Bowls? That's crazy, and he's only 26.
Well, I mean, we per the internet, we ended the GOAT debate forever for Patrick Mahomes. It's over for him, So hey, he's going to retire any moment now. At 29 years old as Patrick Mahomes. So that discussion is closed.
So nothing he does over the next 10 years, 12 years of his NFL career is it's done. No, we've locked it in. Number 2, no higher.
Yep, number 2, no higher. Sorry, settle for silver, Pat.
Shame.
Appreciate your time. Andy, any other Super Bowl thoughts you want to get off your chest before we close here?
Yeah, halftime show was great. Pre-game was great. Pre-game was awesome. Like like really experiencing like regional music, all of it, the choreography of it, the camera work, production was top shelf. I thought it was just like as a broadcast event, that was friggin' awesome Super Bowl. The like the actual TV production of the halftime show, it was phenomenal too. That looked awesome. Yeah,
I will say, man, I'm not usually, this type of guy, but as I was preparing the steak frites for dinner during the Super Bowl for my wife and I was definitely like sing along to America the Beautiful, man. That was you're right. Pre-game was awesome. The national anthem was awesome. Extremely electric stuff. Just great stuff all around. Okay. That's going to do it for today's show. Hell of a Super Bowl, hell of a season. I want to sincerely thank everyone who listens to or watches this show. Obviously this is our last show of the football season. Not even close to our last show. We'll be doing plenty of content in the off season, but I'm very, very grateful to do this as a job, and I'm very, very grateful to do it here and do it on this show. Among the other many responsibilities that we have here at Yahoo, Andy, it's very cool to get to do this show, and I'm very grateful to the people that listen to it. I'm especially grateful to the people who work on this show. Producer Colin, Jason has made this show look better than ever, and I have a great cast of people to do it along with me. Andy, including yourself, of course, the oldest and wisest among us, for sure. I'm always filled with gratitude at the end of an NFL season. This one, no question, is right up there, and we're nominated for a Fantasy Sports Writer Association Award. So I hope for everybody, not myself, but I hope for everybody who works on this show, we win that thing, because everybody deserves it. And I'm very grateful to everyone who listens to this show.
Yeah, you're maybe a little too humble. Like, great hosting by you. Pretty good Matt Harmon season, start to finish. So very, very thankful for you as well.
System quarterback. I'm the Jared Goff of the podcast.
Game manager. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Like I said, it's if I do it well, it's because I enjoy it, and I have a freaking blast doing this every day. So I'm very grateful. But like I said, that is going to do it for today's show. And it is going to do it for the 2024 NFL season, which I just had an absolute joy of a time covering. But as the NFL season ends, the fun on this podcast, it is only getting started. We're going to be back on Thursday to kick off our off-season coverage, and be sure to tune in for that show. It's an important one. Look, you guys who are listening to this show right here on February 10th are like, I can't wait to pull up the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast on February. I know you people aren't going anywhere because you're the sickos that I love. But make sure you tune into that show, because like I said, it's an important one. We are going to reveal our draft season content calendar. We have a lot of stuff that's very exciting to talk about. You don't want to miss on that. It's killer content plan coming from Colin and everybody on that side. That's going to be great. Can't wait to talk about it on on Thursday's show. Scott Pianowski is going to be the one to join me for that. Until then, we are out.